a story to explain the Berwyn event. Although the military people have come forward, have said, no, there was some sort of craft that came down, bodies were found, and there was this virus angle, and there was this hazardous hazmat type outfits that all the guys were wearing down at Porton down when they got there. The government says, well, you know, we looked into it, we don't have any files, which is kind of like a classic similar story we hear from elsewhere. And they say that the event was a combination of two things. They said that there was a localised mini earthquake on the ground at the same time that there was a meteor shower right overhead, which isn't impossible, but it's kind of like, you know, what are the chances of... It's not, I mean, England's not known for its major earthquakes. You know? We actually do get small ones now, very small ones, but, you know, nothing like a major one. And yet they're saying that there was this localised earthquake which was big enough to sort of shake buildings. You know, people in the little villages in North Wales talk about how, you know, pictures would fall off the wall and panes of glass were broken and things like that. So it's a pretty severe one. And they said at the very same time, a large meteor flashed overhead. So the official story is, people saw the meteor overhead and then the ground shook from the earthquake, and it made people think something was coming in and crash landed on the mountain. Which, you know, for me, it's too much of a stretch to think it was just, you know, meteors and an earthquake at the same time, at the same location. But the problem is, of course, it's like with a lot of these cases, we've reached this brick wall. But with Bob's research, as I said, Bob's found, you know, more and more things that kind of lead to this biological angle, and certainly the Porton Down issue is a major part of it, and it also in relation to another case. Now, excuse me. RAF Bentwaters was the military base that was involved in the famous Rendlesham Forest UFO case in England in 1980. And for those who may not be aware of this, in December 1980, over the course of December 26th to December the 28th, there were sort of multiple UFO encounters in a nearby forest called Rendlesham Forest. And there are reports of strange lights in the sky, beaming like laser beams almost to the base itself. Reports of a small triangular-shaped object manoeuvring through the trees, and even reports of military personnel supposedly seeing small alien-like creatures with large cat-like eyes. So a very controversial story, and again, the government doesn't deny that something happened. The British Ministry of Defence's official story is that everybody was mistaken by the rotating light from a nearby lighthouse, which you know, is kind of, I guess it's a novel way of trying to explain the case, to put it mildly. But again, like with Roswell, like with the Berwyn Mountains case in '74, we've got a lot of military people who've come forward to talk about their involvement. And you won't be able to tell from here, but that guy there is a man named Larry Warren, a friend of mine. And Larry was one of the original US Air Force men who was on the base at the time. And I took that picture in 2000, which was the 20th anniversary of the event. As you can see, they made like this big flag, and we went out to the base. And the base at the time was actually closed down. It was closed in the 1990s. And when basically the US military sort of cut back its presence in Europe, and so the base was shut down, you know, and the troops were reassigned wherever. But the base was just left as it was, and it stayed like that for about 6 or 7 years, where it was just like the base was a ghost town, but all the signs were still there, and you know, sort of do not enter and all that kind of thing. But it's now being sort of remodeled as like an industrial estate where there are, you know, you can rent all the different buildings, etc., you know, for offices and that kind of thing. But back then, as I said, all the signs were up, and Larry was one of the people who was involved in this particular event. But there's a little-known story that links the Rendlesham Forest case with Porton Down. Now, most of the stories that surround the Rendlesham case concern sightings of the UFO, the little alien bodies, creatures I should say, and reports of strange lights in the sky and weird things manoeuvring in the woods, and things like that. Well, there's also a story that came from a researcher named Georgina Bruni, And Georgina wrote a book called You Can't Tell the People, which is about the Rendlesham case. And during the course of her research, Georgina was told that on one particular morning, which is, we think at least, was after the first encounter on the night of the 26th, so this would have been the morning of the 27th, that reportedly a team of personnel drove up from Porton down to Bentwaters and went to one of the buildings and came out in these sort of full body protection suits and made their way into the woods. They were in there for like 2 hours and came out with something that was placed into a large crate and reportedly taken back down to Porton Down in Wiltshire. Now, again, the big question is, what was it? We don't know. But clearly, for Porton Down to be involved, that would suggest, at the very least, something that was biological and hazardous, and which again is sort of the central theme of Bob's book. And given the fact that Porton Down is the British equivalent of Fort Detrick in Maryland, then you've got a tie in there as well. So this sort of takes the whole story, it becomes like a transatlantic story where it's not just in the US that a realization has been made that, you know, there is this viral angle to the UFO puzzle. Now, the big question is, if this is all true and extraterrestrials are sort of a biological threat to us, is it being done deliberately, or is it just the case that we're exposed to something which has a hazardous effect on us, but may not actually be, you know, that may not be the goal of it. You know, there are some people who research this issue and actually think there are sort of sinister extraterrestrials that are trying to destroy us with viruses, you know, of a type that we just simply cannot combat them. Other people think it may just be, you know, if one of these things crashes and people come across the bodies, their biology is so different to ours that possibly something that to their body is so normal, you know, is lethal to us, but it's not being deliberately introduced. And I think you can look at it both ways, because the Roswell event was clearly like an unpredicted random event. You know, that wasn't planned where, you know, aliens released some sort of biological aerosol across the sky. The craft crashed. That's the only reason the military personnel were exposed to it, was because the event occurred, the crash occurred. So we could look at it that was just an innocent exposure, but it turned out lethal for the recovery team. On the other hand, if we look at the cattle mutilations, that seems to be a deliberate program. And people think, you know, people forget one important thing. It's not just cattle that are being targeted for whatever's going on. It's one of our major food sources that's being targeted. And, you know, that to me is an important and potentially significant thing to remember. You know, it's like, why is it always cattle? You know, you do occasionally hear of things like sheep mutilations and chickens, but it's predominantly cattle. Well, particularly in the US, beef, you know, is one of the major food sources. And, you know, if you wanted to slowly, covertly introduce something, that would be the best way to do it. So, you know, we can look at it from a sinister angle, and we can look at it from an innocent angle. The big question is sort of, where do we go from here? Well, Bob, you know, to his credit, he's still pushing on, he's still researching this, and I'm not sure how much further we can get, you know, unless other people sort of come forward and fill in different strands of the stories. But if anybody's got any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Yeah.
I have a piece of the consequence. I had an experience where I was actually sampled. Like, I had an experience where I was sampled Japanese sample and helping them in American gardening for Buto dancers, and Buto is supposed to comment dance, so there's some radioactive relationship there in Japan. Is it a different relationship to technology laws? I had experience where I woke up and I was like shuddering like this. And then I came to, and I had my vaginal wall on the right, so it was pooled like this, was very open. And I had some altar oils that I did in healing prayer, and I put it, I was just, you know, put it on the ceiling, I reached up with it, and it glowed. And so I went to go to Christ ceiling, and clearly I was like, let's all look up and situated. But since then I've had kind of sense of things, and I'm on YouTube, and I'm looking at all the alien sightings and all these things and finding all these things. And my sense of it, the piece that I'm looking at, and running through my head when we were talking, is that my ovums could be used with alien DNA. There is a biocompatibility in the total evolution, and maybe a part of like why peacocks, or not peacocks instead of dinosaurs, kind of a gravitation towards biocompatible. And I also had a really strong channel that happened when there was Roswell. There was a kind of technological sharing, and that there was a betrayal, and that in that betrayal, an attempt to establish a food chain relationship with them, certain dignitaries that they had offered to the technological sharing were slain and eaten. And that has been the really uncomfortable, like, what kind of food chain do you think this is? It leads to cattle mutilation, the biocompatibility could be some of the viral relations, which may be just, byproduct of the relational energy, having been eaten, when they're not really part of our food chain, and they're not going to eat us back. And that makes it really awkward, like, what are we going to do about this? Uh-oh. And nothing, never mind, except for already, like, acrobatics and our technological machine. It's like, uh-oh. And that could actually involve people like George H.W., which is why it's suppressed, because at that time he was doing weapons dealing, and that's something to JFK too, where, they had so much weapons dealing in the world, and really built himself up, and part of that is connected to that. Like, that was a part of their conspiracy of establishing kind of the relationships with the populace that they needed to establish their, sense of hierarchy. So all that's been entertaining, and it comes through, it still goes through, and, and for me, it's a lot of sympathetic empathy, and it's a little awkward, but when you see it from that perspective, you can see a very awkward relationship is working where they had hoped an evolutionary connection, where we're ready for technology to share that, and they evolved just for some time. And then it comes to, oh, you're just going to eat us. And then everything goes like viral, everything goes like, whoa, and what kind of biocompatibility, and it becomes very awkward. And then with the weapons dealing and the war structuring and the wrongful relationship with the populace, so you're kind of going to say, we're going to have this just eating food chain smoothly, that becomes, just that realm that we're looking at, like why there's a puzzle in the relationship. So I don't really think it's to talk about that.
Well,
so you never talk about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you talk about sort of abductions and things like that, I mean, there's clearly like a genetic component to it in some fashion. We don't really understand what it is and all sorts of different theories. There is this angle of maybe their biology is sort of, on the decline. They're physically declining, and they sort of do the equivalent of, like we're now learning, things like gene splicing, but on a far more sophisticated level, which isn't impossible, but some people think that's like a cover story, and that they're actually trying to find ways to sort of degrade the human race, to sort of like release a Trojan horse into the the human genome, if you like, or something along those lines. Yeah, and I think everybody sort of probably wants it all to be good and positive. It may not be, Things aren't always good and positive on the earth. We know that. So why should we think that, everything out there is all good and positive too, So, but yeah, I think cattle mutilations, crashed UFO events, abductions, you can actually find, like I said, when you dig deep, sort of biological issues, virology, which come to play in all these different aspects. But often they've been so overlooked because people just don't think there's a connection. It's like with the Kennedy assassination, I mentioned just 24 hours before Kennedy's death, Of all the people he could have met, it was like one of the senior personnel from Fort Detrick and from Wright-Patterson. Both places, and in terms of the years, where alien bodies were supposedly taken to. So, on its own, the fact that Kennedy might have met these people means nothing until you research their background, and then you find what else they were doing. And that's why I think the story's been overlooked for so long. It's the threads of, well, not even realising there are threads, So.
Are you familiar with the Varginha, Brazil story?
Yeah.
Where there was a crash and these guys with these huge eyebrows looking like Groucho Marx were walking around, aliens. And they captured, I think they shot one, and then they captured one, and they assigned a man to guard him. And the guy that was guarding him died within 24 hours of some kind of,
Bob actually researched that. He's got a chapter on that in the book, and he talks about how, he sort of had this sudden reaction to some sort of virus, and, they did all they could to save him, and it just didn't work. There's actually questions have been asked about SARS, the SARS virus, which sort of erupted, in very mysterious circumstances. One of the theories is, could it have come from outer space? There's actually sort of theory related to this. It's called Panspermia, and the idea is that, say for example, a passing comet, if it had sort of biological microbes on it and it came close enough to the Earth, that these microbes could potentially survive a journey through our atmosphere and land on the planet and seed life. So in other words, you could sort of spread life by microbes and cells literally travelling from planet to planet. And of course the other related angle is, well, if you can bring life to it, could you also bring a virus to it, perhaps, you know, on the tail of a comet or something like that, where there wouldn't even be an involvement of UFOs as such, it would just be extraterrestrial matter being brought to the Earth. So, you know, that's a potentially significant angle as well.
Hey Nick, would you mind rephrasing the questions for future questions for the camera?
Would I do what?
Would you mind rephrasing the questions for the camera?